So a little bit about me first. My name is Sanne Peters, which is a Dutch name. Sorry, something up. Hello. Something again. I work at a small company called Bankai as a front-end software architect. I'm specific about that architect bit because I think a lot about the system as a whole, and I'm kind of the only front-end developer, so implicitly you are the architect as well. But luckily next week a few other front-end developers are joining the company, and I'm officially the architect. So, like I said, I work at a tiny design agency actually because I'm the only front-end developer and the rest are designers. And we're actually only just 4 people, but we work a lot by collaborating with others. And we collaborate a lot, actually really a lot. Like, we work with governments, we work with scientific institutes, we work with chip manufacturers, and also like people who do data science. And what we do in that space is basically that we involve them in our way of working as well, and we involve ourselves in their way of working, so we become a team, not like they're our clients and here's the stuff we made. No, it's more like you're part of the team now and we're going to work together on this. So I'm usually like the only one actually from Bankai within that team, and the rest are just people from other places. So we need something to help us in that regard, and that's why we love design systems, because they are collaboration and communication tools. They're not just like a beautiful document full of little components and colors and stuff like that, because that's nice, but if that has no meaning, it's just that, components and colors. Because, yeah, the thing is, like, you need to know who uses design systems, and actually all of these, it's designers, developers, product owners, copywriters, data science, and marketeers. We all use it in a slightly different way. So designers, they're mostly just concerned about like what colors do we have and how are they defined and how are they used, and what kind of UI components do I have, so I don't have to redesign a whole different thing that basically does the same thing like the other thing that we have. Developers just want to know how to use it. Also, in general, just read documentation about like the utilities and everything, and don't like think, oh, maybe I should build this, and then discover later on that it's already existing somewhere else. Product owners. There's a bit of a vague one, but they like to see what you're doing and where the money goes. And showing a beautiful document about all the specifications and the UI components basically shows that you giving them their money's worth. Also, they can see copywriters going in through that in that document, and copywriters then can see like seeing that UI component in isolation, seeing, okay, so I need to put this kind of text on that button so it start making sense. Data scientists, slightly strange group perhaps, but they can see how data is displayed within UI components, and even further down see how to actually put that data in there, because that's the thing. The way we work is that data scientists map data in components. I don't even touch that. I don't have to. And the marketeers, and they just like see what colors are used and why they're used and what their purpose is, so then you just use the blue instead of the orange. So how do you build something that can be used by everyone? There are a few key parts in this. Like, first, work together, then keep a structure, and then the third one is grow safely. I'll go into that right now. because part one, working together, is actually the most important bit. You need to define this. You need to own this system together, and the best way is to achieve this is actually to work on it together, to be collectively involved in building and designing and structuring it entirely. And this is all very nice, but I'm going into detail how you actually should do this. The first step is establish common language. It's also high level. But in order to understand each other's needs, you need to speak the same language. Because I can call things a certain way, but the other person calls it that way, and then we don't really know what we're talking about to each other, and everything gets confusing. People get annoyed. Not fun. Like this thing. Actually, it's right here on my laptop, but I have no clue what this thing is called. Some people call it something like a blah-de-blah connector or something like that. Or some people might call it like very fancy long. I can't pronounce these things. The thing is, this is a new thing. It's recent. And that's why nobody has a name for it yet. And that makes it difficult to talk about this thing. Like, if you're going to pick that thing up and say, I'm going to take this thing with me to a conference, they don't know what you're talking about. Like, okay, whatever. And then in the meantime, they're looking, I can't find this thing because I still don't know what it's called. So that's the first thing you should do. Establish a common language. And that's the thing, the whole team should use the same terms for the same things. And you can actually do that in a very practical way. It's by involving each other in the decision making. So like, how do we name this thing? Like for instance, you, I'm generalizing of course, you as a developer build something. I should have a name because it's new. Nobody knows exactly what to call it yet. And together with the designer, you basically discuss how it should work and stuff like that. And from there, naturally even flows a name. And then talking about the structure, like this visual structure or even the code structure. Does it make sense to build it like that? And just have a discussion about it. And also ask if the design was not completely clear about it, ask how it actually should work. Ask all the difficult questions, even when building the thing. Go back to the design and say, I've built this, but I'm not quite sure if it should work like that. And it usually happens like the designer can't think about everything. So maybe just discuss it. Come up with a solution at that time. And then discuss, of course, do we, point out we, do we need this feature documented? Because sometimes things are just so implicit you're not going to document it. But maybe you should. Next step is then sharing is caring. I'm going to drink something. That's basically from your perspective. Share what you know about the web. Like, designers can make more informed decisions that way. And also what's possible and what's not possible. Because that way they can get inspired by all the ideas and things happening out there. And maybe propose to research something. Like, I don't know if it will work, but if you like give me a day, I can look it up, create it, maybe either a prototype, show how it could work. They can see possibilities, their mind goes wild, you get crazy designs. And talk about new things. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I learned about variable fonts. I heard about it, but now I know about it. And about a week ago, I gave a presentation about it. They were like, "Ooh, this is exciting." Also, when you start collaborating, you need to keep in mind that you don't force people to do what they don't want to. It's like there is this philosophy going on that designers should code as well. I disagree, because some designers are like fundamentally uncomfortable with it. But you just need to be like, it's a on person by person basis you do this. Like for instance in our team we have one designer who's completely okay with writing CSS, but the other one just like almost gets anxiety attacks by looking at code. So we kind of loosen up the definitions of what you're allowed and what you're not allowed to do, as long as it's according to the rules of how we work together. But in general, just be nice and be forgiving. Like, your designer might not be writing that great of CSS, but then teach the person. Well, this is the second bit. Keeping structure, because this is like the very, very important thing. If you keep structure within your whole application structure, well, it just makes sense, because you're allowing yourself to think less and you create some room for like creativity. I like this one, I really do. So yeah, defining a structure for your system. First you start with the most basic values. There is actually a way of working here. What we do is use design tokens to define the most basic values. I'll put something beneath there so you can figure out where it came from. But basically what they are definitions, and I'm really saying definitions, not like variables or values, definitions of the colors. Like, for instance, what's the CTA color? Like, I'm not using terms like primary color, because in general, don't think like that. Primary doesn't really have any meaning. Maybe from a design perspective it does, but it doesn't really. Just call it, that actually has meaning to most people. Because if I use CTA color, I'm very, very specific about, this is about call to actions. Use this color for call to actions. Maybe I use the exact same color value for like a primary branding thing, but that could change. So if I keep those things separate, they become meaningful and far easier to maintain. But this also goes for typography, so fonts and how they are used throughout the application. Like, we define things as a heading font, field font, body font, and split those up. What is actually in there? I don't care. Could change any time. If I change it once, it just spreads out through the system anyway. And that's how you maintain this bit. If you got that down, you've got your basis. Then the next step is to organize components in a hierarchy, because it creates structure and adds context to each component. It's very easy to have a whole bunch of components that just exist alongside each other. You can easily have like hundreds and hundreds upon them. At one point it doesn't even start to make sense anymore, and that's why you create a hierarchy, because then you create meaning on a higher level. And what we actually use is atomic design, and not everyone likes atomic design because it uses weird concepts like organisms and molecules and atoms. Like, what are those things actually? I'm sorry, Brad Frost is not here, but I get why people get confused, because it's not entirely clear what he means by them, but maybe because it's abstract. So if you make it less abstract, and I'm actually going to use an example to explain this? Like, what if you see atoms as bricks? If you chop up a brick, it's still a brick, just smaller. So there's no point in chopping it up any further. But with bricks, you can create walls. And walls can be part of houses. And here you add some meaning, because organisms now become things you can just pick up, use wherever you want. There's no dependency on something else to make it work from a user perspective. And I really mean from a user perspective. Like, if I walk into a house, I can just sit there. I'm sheltered from the rain, it works for me. But I don't really can use a wall for anything. Well, maybe fence off things, but that's it. Bricks are even more useless on their own. But it starts to get more meaning if you put houses in a layout. Oop. Wrong key. Like street plans, which are essentially layouts. And you can then use your street plans to create neighborhoods, which you can translate to views or pages, whatever you want to call those. And then, everyone clear about views, what they are? Just raise your hand if you're like, I don't know. Okay, good. And finally, you create your app or your village. And that way you have your whole system. So what is actually the design system in this? If you couple them with design tokens, which is basically go through all this and give them the basic values to work with, those things are the design system. So you can actually take this bit and just use it in there. Like, these things don't even have to know there's such a thing as an application to begin with. They can be completely agnostic. They'll be like, I don't care. And that way you get an extra layer in there that you can just do all your data management and state management in here. And the components, they don't care. You just pass data into them, they do things. So, next step. Thing is composing components, not building them. Because you can just get a design from a designer and see it and just like almost mindlessly type it out in code and you consider yourself finished. Or you can just grab your designer and say like, okay, I built this so far, it's not fully done, but should we do it like this or should we do it like that? And also, it doesn't have to be right the first time. You can iterate on it. That's why it's called composing. It's like the first draft is never going to be the good one. Just work on it. And when you got like a feeling this is a good one, merge that to develop or whatever your strategy is. So making components is actually more of a creative process. And maybe you should see it like that. It's called iterating in design. And maybe that iterating should also be happening in your components. So yeah, you're an artist now. So next time when you get home and your mum and your dad ask you like, so what are you really doing? I'm a digital artist. That's what you say. They still have no clue what you're doing, but it sounds cool. They can say it to their friends. Yeah, my daughter is a digital artist. So yeah, again, this composing is done through collaboration. You discuss the design with the person who made it. Like, the design is not the owner of the design. You co-own it. And that way you get involved in the process. They get involved in your process. You start collaboration. You ask the things that you really need to know. Does it contain all the info you need? Is all the spacing right? Does that spacing make sense with the system you already have? Because that way you teach the designer how you've implemented your whole spacing system. Because they think in spaces. They don't think in paddings or margins. But for us, that really, really matters. Because they have a different effect on your layout. Also, ask questions on how it should work. Not everything is clear from the beginning. It might be just a static mock-up, and they say, yeah, if I click on this, that a thing opens, and it shows you things, and like, you need to start thinking like, yeah, it shows you a thing, but what does it show me? And basically, you're verifying if the designer thought about everything. And also, because these tend to be afterthoughts, they shouldn't be. They should be an integral part of the process. Are animations and transitions defined? And if not, should they be? Some applications prefer like very minimal transitions, like the applications I usually work on are for company and businesses, and everything just should work as fast as possible. Slow, beautiful, slow transitions, no, nothing like that, just like boop, side panel opens, I got my data. But it should move, because otherwise it's just bam, there. Nobody gets that. Next step is naming your component. And it's a bit like naming your child, so that's why I put that picture in the back. Because maybe most people can remember that, like that scene that when Rafiki says Simba. I just love that bit. But naming things is so hard. It is really hard. It's painfully hard even. I have talks about this at work a lot. But there are tricks. And I kind of figured it out by doing it wrong. So define the name rather by what it does, typo, sorry, than by how they look. Like you can have an accordion in your interface, which is a design term, but maybe define it more like what it actually does, like a collapsible list, or even better, a toast. I actually didn't know what a toast was. Well, who knows what a toast in UI means? Well, designers know. See, that's the problem. Toasts are a very vague thing, but they're actually pop-up notifications. So in our system, they call pop-up notifications. There's a little comment, yeah, they're also called toasts. So now you know. That way you can actually look it up, toast, and you get pop-up notification. Use simple everyday words. Like, you don't use your technical term for a thing because you have a multidisciplinary team and not everyone uses your fancy magical word like toast. I really don't like the word toast. It reminds me of bread. I just don't get it. Iterate on a name. First time, you might feel like, yeah, it kind of works. But when you start working on it, you add features and you're like, this name really sucks. And you just rename it. You're working on a feature branch or anything like that, and if that's fine, because that gives you the room to be creative, and then just the name changes. Point out why you change the name again. Because it doesn't matter if you do have the right idea to begin with, is that the end result is good. And if you really don't know, ask a coworker. I usually do that once every 3 weeks. So they made up a really crazy thing. And I have to ask, like, what does it do? And how do I even call it? Also some very useful tips. Vue.js has a whole page about how you name things. I tried to look it up on React, couldn't find anything. If anybody knows, just let me know. W3C also has something. It's a bit hard to read, which is a problem in general for W3C. But I'm the kind of person who likes to read documentation written by them. So I know my way around, but well, terrible user experience, you can call it. And then we go to the next step, because you have your system, you have it structure, you have your design tokens and everything, they're all there. But then you need to be thinking about, okay, I've got this team and this thing is going to grow. It's going to grow really big at one point. But how do I manage that even? First step, and this is, everybody hates writing documentation, but you really need to do this, because otherwise it just gets hard. It's a communication tool, remember. So you need to document it, because if you document once, you will never need to explain it again. And that's really true. It's an investment. You need to start thinking more like a business person, because each time you write a document, that's how you actually explain why you should be writing documents to begin with. Each time you write a document, it takes you maybe 2 hours, but it saves you all the little half an hours that you need to explain everything. Like, those are like 4 explanations covered. All the other ones are just win. And you don't have to set it up on your own. There are tools out there. Starguide this, that's actually the one we use, because it's slightly more flexible than Storybook, because you just write stuff in Markdown. It might even be more accessible, because you write things in Markdown. Like, the only thing you have to teach is the designer to use Git, which is doable. I managed, but they should be open-minded to it. So this is all nice in theory, but this is an actual style guide that we use. Well, you can't really see it properly. It's called Kitsune, because it has an extra feature in it that you can give it a whole set of new design tokens and it visually completely changes. And Kitsune is a Japanese creature that can change shape. So it's we've thought about that name 2 days. A lot of argumentation, disagreements, and feelings. But a nice example is this. It's called detailed info header, and basically does what it says. It shows you a heading and some bits of information, and then a set of links. And all of these things are atoms again, which live in this organism, because this is basically, you can put it on top of anything just to give it a basic information and some links where it came from. And now I need to get back. How do I do this? I'm very new to Mac. And then you do this again. Right, that. Yep. Oh wow, I'm at the beginning. That's nice. Very new to Mac. So I'll just skip ahead. Have to be careful. So naming it, yep, fixed. Growing safely. Maybe you noticed there wasn't actually much documentation on that single one, my bad. But at least you get an example of how to use it. this is a system very much still in development, and I'm not perfect, but we're getting there. At least we've got theory down. So each functionality needs to have testing in it, or covering it. So you can start just manual testing scripts. Because if you not confident of somehow, which is silly, about like integration testing and having it automated, start with just manual. At least you have something that just needs to be covered. It's really easy to translate those again to code-based tests. So integration testing, you can do it on 2 levels. You can have integration testing on your component itself in isolation. So it does all the interaction things that it needs to do. And then just do end-to-end testing in your application. So you cover all your bases. Automate them. Because that is so great. It's like you don't have to think about things and you create the extra room for creativity again. Also, don't reinvent the wheel. Just don't. Like, we use methods that are well thought out and established, like structured version control, Git flow. I'm not even deviating from that standard. I'm like, okay, it works fine. Moving on to the next thing. Linting, very important, obviously. Code reviews. You may have did something, missed something. That covers a lot. Integration testing again, and try to automate all of these things. It's like maybe do a commit hook. So every time you do a commit, linting is run. Don't have to think about that again. So, summarize, this basically boils down to communication. Communicate. Start talking in easy terms and just be nice to people. Don't reinvent the wheel. I like to point that out. Because if you start reinventing the wheel, you're just investing time in things that don't really need investment. Like, smart people thought about it, using that. Fine, moving on again. A few final words though. A lot of people think that using a design system creates like some kind of a rigidity, that you have these set of rules, but they're not really rules, they're guidelines. The way I see it, it's a system that creates a new layer on which you can be creative. You don't have to think about how should this button work. No, you made that already. You can create a new thing, a new data visualization based on the tools that you already got. So you can be creative, but within the box. You can get out of the box and create a whole new set of UI components maybe even. But it does save time. And the thing is, if you're using several different creative people in your team, they all have a different way of thinking, but this keeps them in line in a sense. You keep them on the same track. Like, they all want to go different things. They're like herding cats basically. But this way, they basically stay within the pen. They can't really go anywhere, but they're still acting like cats, like they want to. Yeah, that's basically it. So, you can ask me anything about design systems. And you can even reach me online on @sunstreamed on Twitter. Thank you all for listening.